All right, guys, in this video, we're going to talk about recording techniques reviewed. It's what I've called it. And I'm a big fan of evaluating the files that I've been sent before I get into the creative side of mixing. Some of you guys know I do a process called mix prep. I've got an amazing assistant. I don't even call him an assistant. Call him a mix partner. His name is Neil. He's out of Canada, and he does an incredible job hooking me up with the first look of my sessions. He goes in, things like signal flow, gain staging, editing, any kind of last minute stuff, auto align, phase management, you name it. He's hooking me up. He's doing that before I get into my mix process. He slides everything into my mix template. And then when I open it up for the first time, my job is really just to kind of evaluate what I've been given, push up faders, and get the rough mix going as soon as possible. Well, one of those first steps for me once I get it back from Neil is to evaluate the recording. I'm listening for things like tone and character. Have the preamps been driven or distortion been added? Have these been EQ'd or what have you? You kind of get the point where I'm going with this. Have the drums been, the overheads been brightened up, or whatever you can imagine? Do I hear that in the recording of the tracks that I've been sent? One of the things that I'm looking for on that note are whether or not the tracks have been recorded with reverb on them. A lot of times I work with a buddy named Vic Encarnacion out of Chicago. He used to, and still does from time to time, he will print the reverbs to his guitar tracks or his beat production. And that's okay. I dig that. If you're going for a certain vibe as a producer, by all means, commit to your sounds. That's awesome. But we lose some flexibility in mixing when those sounds are committed, and so we have to look at those a different way. But I'm going to evaluate, I'm going to look at them. If I've been given tracks that reverb is already printed on it, and it's really messy, it's really washy, it's a faster song, and it's got this long, maybe sustaining reverb on a part that's kind of rhythmic, and it would be important for that to be processed or given to me unprocessed, dry, then I'll reach out to the producer or the artist and try to get those files dry so that I can do my job better as a mixing engineer. It's not always an option, but when it is, that's great. So I'm going to evaluate the tracks. I'm going to look for room mics. Have I been given any? Do they sound good? When I've got programmed drums, those rooms typically sound really good, and that's awesome. The patterns and everything may be a little bit stale because they're programmed drums, but typically the room mics are recorded really, really well. So there's a pro to using that. I'm going to look for guitar amps. Do I just have do I have a DI? Do I have the amp? Do I have multiple mics on the amp? Do I have a room mic on the amp? A lot of times I do have a amp room, and that's a great way to add some character into the guitar tones. Same thing for the piano, vocalist, background vocalist. Sometimes I'm sent room mics for that. Another big one is strings. All the time when I get strings recorded out of Nashville, it's the best place to get your strings recorded that I found, but you'll have the direct mics for the sections, and then you'll have multiple room mics. Sometimes a left, a center, a right, a stereo pair that's even further back, a mid room, a far room, a Coles room, like a ribbon type room, all kinds of different sounds. Anyways, I'm blabbing about all of that. The importance of that is I'm going to evaluate what I've been given. If the room mics sound good, then I'm going to use them, and I'm going to try to use them because more often than not, the recording engineers try to capture that sound, and they want that a part of that instrument. So I'm going to do my best to evaluate it, use it, and go from there. If they sound pretty darn terrible or bad, then I'm moving into a situation where I'm going to try to recreate or create them using a plugin. Let's talk about recreating room sounds with a plugin in this next little section here. All right, so I've got a couple of drum mics here. Drum room mics, a mono ambient room, and an ambience mic. Like I mentioned, how programmed drums have their cons in the sense of room mics and recording quality, they typically sound really great, right? So these are programmed drums, and the rooms sound great. I'm going to hit play and let you listen to what we have. Okay, so there's a mono room, and then over here we have an ambience mic. Okay, and for this particular song, the client wanted a lot of ambience. They wanted the drums to sound further back. They didn't necessarily, I think how he put it was he didn't want it to sound like a good mix. He wanted it to sound like the kind of mix he heard in his head, which is totally cool. And so these played an integral part in the drum tone. So what I did was I evaluated it. I said, okay, this is great. I want to go with this. And that was that. I could talk about the processing a little bit, maybe give you a quick A-B. But I wanted it to sound bigger, so I added some compression, added a little bit of drive, some saturation from the 1073, and backed off the gain so things stayed chill. I'll give you a quick overview. Not really what I wanted this to be about, but it's a cool sound. So let's go here and show you that. And with it, sounds a little bigger, a little fatter. And then, gotta love Pro Tools errors. And then what I did after that is a pretty drastic move. I used a delay and I put, I took this mono sound and I created the impression of stereo. I delayed the right signal by 35 milliseconds, 100% wet, 35 milliseconds on the left, 0% wet, and it sounds like this. Okay, the client came to me before I did that, and he wanted wider, bigger room sounds. And so I took the mono. I was like, let me get rid of the mono room. Let's make it feel like it's stereo, and that's what I did to do it. The EQ on the back end of it, again, not so much what this is supposed to be about, but it's kind of a cool sound, so I'm going to show it to you. Was the room felt too big, too full. So, and then the other thing, by dominating the drum sound with the room sound, I lost the tone of my toms. I worked so hard to get those direct toms to sound good. There was so much buildup in the mid-range of these room mics, so I cut a lot of mids. I sucked out the lows, so I didn't get the subs from this. And then I took out some of the highs so that the cymbals weren't ringing out too much in this room mic. And so this is the before and after with EQ. Okay, and you can tell by removing the bottom, the mids, and some of that top, we then focus it in this range around 1K and kind of that 200, the warmer side of the room. Again, not really what I wanted to break down too much, but these recordings were good. I used them. Here's another room mic. Let's take a listen to that. Okay, again, it sounded good. I just put a little bit of EQ, took out some of those mids. I didn't want any of the cymbal bleed because we had overheads that were rocking. I did something a little bit unique, and I put the Devil Lock on here from Sound Toys. Let's have a before and after of that one. Let me delete this automation real quick so we can put the volume up for you guys. And here's with it. Okay, so at the end there, you can hear without Devil Lock, it's super clean, not a lot of oomph to it. Adding the Devil Lock, we're getting grit, we're getting grime, distortion. It sounds awesome. I love using that plugin on room mics. And then after that, I still was not happy with the EQ, so I treated it, pulled out some of the mids, got that 3 to 5K out. It was a little bit harsh to my ear. And then some more compression with VMR, contextual, just getting it into the track. Well, that was quite a rabbit trail. But evaluating those room mics, they sounded good. I went with it. I processed them, blended them into the mix. You can see I had the Ocean Way here is my template drum room for me to create a drum room sound. And I ended up not using it in this one because the room sounded great. But if I did want to use this, or I've shown this on the Pro Audio files before, any room sound, you come in here to Reverb of all things, and I could select that, pick a small room, a medium room, and that bus is set up as Ocean Way drums. You can call it drum room, and then you can go to each drum track. You can go to the kick, the snare, the toms individually, the hat, the overheads, whatever you want to have that drum sound, you can send into the Ocean Way or the Reverb and create your own drum room. So, and then you can process it with EQ, compression. You can see I didn't really touch it because I didn't use it, but you can then compress it on the back end, do whatever you want to do like it was a normal drum room tracked with the kit, but you've then created your own using a reverb. Sorry, that one was a little bit all over the place, but I hope that you enjoyed the quick walkthrough and some of the processing that I used on those drum rooms. Let's look at another example. All right, let's come over here and look at an acoustic guitar. In this situation, I addressed it by using Ocean Way, but let's solo this acoustic and check it out with no processing. Okay, so it drives me crazy because that's a keyed acoustic guitar, and it just doesn't sound real. As a guitar player, those kinds of things irk me. I'm sure you may feel the same. If you're a keys player, you're probably thinking, man, we do what we got to do with what we have. So by all means. But let's focus on this. I've got a little bit of processing on this one before, just some console channel. I got a little compression. I've got the Studer tape machine. That stuff's not important right now. What I wanted to give this guitar was a little bit of help to feel more natural as much as possible. I'm not going to make this sound like a real acoustic guitar, but I'm sure going to try to give it more openness, more natural sound. And so I went to Ocean Way in the remic mode, and it sounds like this. Without it, huge difference, right? Wanted to feel more of the body of the guitar, a little bit more warmth. This allowed me to do that. And so I evaluated this track. I felt like it needed something. I went to the plugin. I got what I needed from this reverb. Again, the Ocean Way does something that most plugins don't. Actually, I don't think any plugin does what this does as far as the remic goes. But that's another situation where I evaluated it, felt like it needed it. What I could have done is I could have, similar to how I showed you the snare, is I could have duplicated this track, copied everything, and then taken and placed a reverb on this track instead of the Ocean Way. Maybe used a short room sound like from Deverb. Let's actually pull open Deverb and see what we get. Let's go reverb, Deverb. Let's go small room. Room number 1, small. Let's see what just that sounds like. 100% wet. Okay, so already that to me has got a little bit more natural vibe to it. I'm going to blend that in. Okay, I might compress this, get it a little more even so that those peaks don't jump out. Feels a little bit fake when the keytar does its bend. But another example of how I would apply reverb and get that to sound a little bit more natural before I get into the mix. I'm going to try to kind of evaluate this stuff and make some of these decisions before I push faders, just to kind of evaluate the recording and kind of what I wrote in my notes here. It's a personal choice, but I prefer to apply it before to set the stage beforehand. There you go. So there's the acoustic. Let's look at the, let me delete that so I don't forget whenever I get to my, my other videos for you guys. But let's look at the electric guitar. What's this one doing here? Okay. So that's one where a room mic might sound kind of cool. So if I duplicated this, and let's see here, everything on that track, and then come over and apply a fun one, might be actually that bass amp room. Pretty sure that's a, I think, did I get the plugin aligned? No, I got the UAD version. So if I go to Universal Audio, bass amp room, maybe it's just called Soft Tube, I think it is, right? Bermuda, Chandler. Let's go down to the S's. You guys are screaming at me. You know what it is. If I come down here to Softtube, there we go. Amp room, and there's all the different models. Let's go bass amp room, mono to stereo. I'm gonna add it. And now we can go through and cycle through some of the presets. And I can back that mic up. Without it, nice, right? We're getting that cabinet sound. It actually sounds like we mic'd up a few feet back from the cab, and we've got something nice to blend in. Now you got to be careful with phase. Let's see if we get away with it without any kind of phase shifting. Could be cool to pan it. Okay, one more time. Without it. Just a very clean, dry signal. So you can hear how maybe we have some phase issues, but I like the extra oomph that it gives, a little bit of vibe, and I would do that, possibly print it. I would check for phase, reverse the polarity, maybe use Sound Radix's Pi for phase alignment, and move on from there. That's the guitar. Piano we kind of talked about before, where we used Ocean Way. Just something I will do before I get into mixing, evaluate the tracks, go through and figure out tonality, character, if I want to do something to it. And now we're talking about reverb, but in my other tutorials, I've talked about preamp saturation and other things that I'll do, even EQ, tape saturation, console emulation. Sometimes I'll process that stuff before I get into pushing faders so that it's committed, it's there, and I've made those decisions to help me get that out of my headspace and just get to the creative side of mixing. So I've rambled about that quite a bit. We're gonna go ahead and move into the next video. We've got all kinds of stuff to talk about.